Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being at tonight's meeting. Before we begin the public hearings, I want to announce that rezoning case Z223, northeast of the intersection of Litchford Road, has been withdrawn by the applicant. So we will not have a hearing on that this evening in case there's anybody here for that particular case. We will start the meeting with rezoning Z5021. Oh, and I just want to say, Councilmember Black is absent and excused this evening.
I'm sorry, I missed, when you said Z2, did you say deferred or withdrawn?
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn. Okay, thank you.
All right. So we'll start with Z5021, Fairview Road and Bickett Boulevard.
Good evening, Hannah Reckow, Planning and Development. So this is rezoning request Z5021, about 1 acre size, requesting rezoning from industrial mixed use 3 stories to neighborhood mixed use 4 stories conditional use. That is consistent with the comprehensive plan and inconsistent with future land use map, and was heard by the Transportation and Transit Committee last Thursday and voted out with no recommendation. So this site is north of downtown, sort of on the east side of the 5 Points area, north of the Capitol Boulevard corridor, and commercial and industrial uses around that area. It's a collection of properties right at the corner of Fairview Road and Bickett Boulevard. Currently 1-story commercial uses on the site and surface parking. You can see most of its frontage is along Bickett Boulevard, also has frontage on Fairview Road. And then I'll point out Roanoke Park is right to the north there, bounded by Cherokee Drive and Greenwood Street. Here's some views of the site, looking south and east. There are a number of conditions that are requested with this case. They are looking to limit height within the 4-story district, prohibit uses within the NX district, provide a bike share station if requested, a condition about building materials, certain proportion would be brick. They're capping commercial uses as well as residential units, and providing a minimum number of outdoor seating seats within the design of the 2 frontages. There are conditions limiting hours of operation for commercial uses, and limiting where truck delivery serving non-residential uses can gain access from, applying hours for outdoor amplified music, installing a sound wall along the frontages, along the parking decks, and conditions specifying parking access between residential and non-residential uses. And there are a few conditions specifying transportation improvements on and around the site. So there's a commitment to realign the intersection of Greenwood Street and Bickett Boulevard, and ensuring that there's no parking spaces between the building and the street, and then lining up the residential parking access with that new intersection. Providing a crosswalk at that place, providing parallel parking spaces along the Bickett Boulevard frontage, and providing a painted bike lane along the Fairview frontage. I'll note that that condition would really only apply if something other than a Tier 3 site plan came in. If that came in, they would have to establish the city's current standard, which is behind the curb for bike lane. And then providing at least 1 direct street-facing pedestrian entrance to the residential use on Bickett Boulevard, and applying a build-to of 12 feet along both frontages. So here we have 1 mixed-use district to another, an increase in maximum building height, 1 story. So an increase in total number of residential units that could be sited on the site, which is capped by that condition at 48, and then all other commercial uses capped at 20,000 square feet. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, inconsistent with the future land use map, consistent with the urban form map, some consistent policies, Many of these speak to the proximity of the site to potential future BRT on the northern corridor, as well as the lifting of some restrictions on housing that are part of the IX district. And then inconsistent policy, future land use map currently is medium-scale residential. NX would be inconsistent with that designation. And so approval would be a de facto amendment to the map to a neighborhood mixed use on the site. And Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval. I believe that's it. And with that, I can answer any questions you have.
One thing I'd like to ask staff to do is give us a recap of what transpired in the Transit and Transportation Committee meeting, because that went to that committee for discussion.
Sure. So we had a discussion of the overview of the case, and then I'm going to pull up my notes, but had some information about the transportation context of the site, especially or specifically traffic volumes and speeds in the surrounding area, as well as traffic calming projects currently on the site.
Yeah, if I could, quite a few things were also discussed. So I'm just going to go through bullet points of the things that were talked about and discussed. Limit the height bike share location to be installed, a cap on commercial not to exceed 20,000, residential units not to exceed 48. Outdoor seating of at least 12 shall be included in the frontage design. Truck delivery serving non-residential uses limited to Fairview Road access. No outdoor amplified music after 8. I'm trying to think what else okay, traffic. Traffic study was done by the developer, and retail question as far as the square footage. Currently even though it says it can go up to 25,000 square feet, currently there's only 11,000 square feet of retail there now. A question that was asked by Council Member Jones asked if there was safety projects planned for the site. Not at this time. Residents were concerned about the term affordable housing that was used. I think that term has stopped being used. Just these homes supposedly are lower than what's there. But a lot of the concerns residents had was not enough parking. Residents concerned that there was not enough parking and caused issues of existing residents in the area. And residents were concerned for pedestrian safety as far as foot traffic around the park and surrounding areas. I also asked about the intersection right there above where they would come in to have commercial retail parking. That entrance is where you have Cherokee, Bickett, Gremlin, Greenwood, and Fairview all come together. So it's almost like a 5-point in 5 points. So I brought a concern there for staff to look at that regardless of this case. And so we referred this out with no recommendation because we had to have the public hearing. But we did ask that the access off Bickett not be used, move all the access to Fairview, off of Fairview for residential and retail parking. That came up, and then we also just asked the community, those that were at the session and the developer, to talk. I saw them talking when we left. I don't know what came out of that conversation, but that's kind of where we left it.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, hi. Can you give a quick, side-by-side of what could be built in the IX district by right and what types of uses will no longer be available now that if it becomes NX?
Sure. Yeah. So the main changes between IX and NX regarding use are IX has a limitation on residential units, so they're not allowed on the ground floor. And then there's a number of more intensive commercial uses and light industrial uses that are permitted in IX and would not be permitted in NX. And I can pull up the UDO and give you some examples if you'd like. So things like light manufacturing, research and development, self-service storage, as well as vehicle repair, car wash, those types of uses.
I have a question, if I may. Based upon you stated that residential wouldn't be allowed on the ground floor, the way the topo is at this site, what's considered the ground floor? Because I know in the current design, based off what they've stated is you have entry off of Fairview for parking, and then you would have an entry off of Beckett. So if we were to move all access to Fairview, would Beckett still be considered ground or not?
So that's a limitation in the current zoning that doesn't exist in the requested district.
Okay.
I don't know the answer off the top of my head of what it would be currently, but.
Okay. That's fair. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of staff? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing then, if we could set the timer to 8 minutes. First, we'll hear from the applicant.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm Chuck Walker, 275 North Pea Ridge Road, Pittsburgh, North Carolina. We're representing the case. What we wanted, we implore that you please look at your staff reports, because the staff review of this project does not have a single negative comment on it. And it is comp plan compliant. It will be future land use compliant when the BRT is approved down the street, which we believe is going to happen. And it is a down zoning from industrial to NX3. Just three quick things from the report. This request would increase housing units that would locate near a future BRT route, allow more people to use lower carbon transition mode. The request would permit a variety of housing types, including apartment type units, which are relatively more affordable compared to detached houses, and especially in high desire area like 5 Points. The request would promote neighborhood serving land uses such as retail and personal services adjacent to an existing neighborhood. In that same listing, it shows detriments of the proposed case. It says none identified. Finally, going through the current planning department, the historic district department, Raleigh Fire, Raleigh Parks, Raleigh Water, Stormwater, Urban Forestry, and Transportation, the report says no negative impacts from this case. That's from the review point of view. We understand the neighbors have some issues that we are trying to work through, and we believe that the most important item is traffic and access. So we have a superior, we think is a superior design which separates residential and commercial on two different streets. One that's going to be card protected by for the residential side, and the other one is going to be commercial, or an open parking lot to be used by the commercial. The neighbors have asked us if it is possible to get to the entrances for both uses off of Fairview. We believe we have a solution that could do that. So what I'm asking the council now is to give us guidance of what you think is more important, so we can figure out which path that we go down. And if we're going to go down one of those paths, I ask that you either hold the public hearing open for next month or send us to a committee, because either of those decisions are going to change some of the conditions we have, and to actually give us some time to speak further with the neighbors. Whew, did that well. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Could you turn off the timer, please? Could you give me an example of some of the changes that would, like if you were to address the neighbors' issues with access off of Fairview, what are some of the changes that you would anticipate?
4 of the current conditions speak to condition number 12, condition number 13, condition number 15, and condition number 19 all take their basis from assuming that there is a driveway on Beckett. So those 4 conditions would need to change if we choose, or if we're trying to go down the path where it's 2 drive cuts or 2 access points off of Fairview. So it's just, it's things like, condition number 12 says the applicant shall provide on-site residential parking with a card reading gate access off of Bickett and will provide on-site parking for the commercial uses behind the building. So if they're both on Fairview, then we have to change that condition. Those are the kind of details that we're going to need to work through depending on which path you as the council think is the more important thing to do.
Okay. Would you, Councilmember Jones, you have a question?
Can you help me understand, this was from 2021, so we've been working on it for 2 years, and I know that the access onto Bickett has been a big concern the entire time for the residents. So what is different now that's going to, I mean, now we are able to, but for the past 2 years you haven't been?
No, not at all. As I said before, we believe the design professionals and apparently the staff think that 2 entrances that separate the uses, one with a card protection, one open to the public on 2 different streets, is a superior traffic movement design. However, if what's going on here, the neighbors are wanting to try and ask us to get everything off of Fairview, that is a different system. We believe we now believe it is possible, but we believe it is a less advantageous for traffic movement.
No, I understand that, and I appreciate you listening to the neighbors. I'm just, the time span is, it feels right at the last minute, because for the last 2 years, I know I've been at the CAC meetings, I've been there, and this is what their biggest concern has been, and it's always been no, 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 and now we're changed. So I'm just wondering how we got here to now where we're able to think of it. I know you're saying
We have a bunch of details to work out. One of the reasons why this project has taken 2 years is because there was a cloud over the title of one of the pieces of land that took almost 10 months to fix. So that's the single biggest reason that it has taken this long.
okay, thank you.
Councilmember Harrison?
Yeah, so also at the committee meeting, we did talk about parking spaces, and you had mentioned, can you just remind me how many parking spaces that you were prepared for both the residential and then the commercial side?
The current plan shows 128 spaces. We have far more parking than any other proposed use within striking distance of 5 Points.
And then, so if the entrances for both are moved to Fairview, do you expect that to affect the number of parking spaces available?
We don't think it will affect the number of parking spaces. What we think it will affect is the traffic movement on Fairview. And I have Reinald Stevenson from Raymond Kemp here to speak to that if you have any questions. But we believe that's going to be the largest differential versus what we have now.
Okay, and I just want to note again from the Transportation Committee, at this point, there is no condition around parking, so the idea that you proposed is
we've offered to put a condition in there, whether it's where the spaces are or an estimate of the overall parking count. We can do that. We haven't done that yet because the needle keeps changing. Well, maybe we'll do this. Maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do this. So we haven't put a condition on it yet because that number seems to be shifting. We're told on one side that they don't think we have enough parking in our site for our project, yet they want to know if we can use some of our parking spaces for the neighborhood to use. So we're just trying to get this worked out.
okay. Well, I just want to make sure that I brought up the parking issue because that had come up in committee. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, question for staff procedurally. If conditions like that were to come into play, like we closed access on Bickett and then thus the applicant felt like they needed to remove these other ones, I know we can only move in like a more restrictive direction once the process is in play. Would this, would this be considered more restrictive and we can keep flowing, or does it get weird?
I would have to defer to maybe the city attorney's office on that particular question. But yes, you're right, it has to get more restrictive.
David, you're with the city attorney's office. A lot of that's going to depend on how they word those conditions that have to be amended if they receive direction from you to put the access off of Fairview and how they're wanting to change it. If it's a clarification that we no longer have access on on Bickett, and everything's off of Fairview, we just need to look at that. I wouldn't see that that's more or less restrictive necessarily, but it depends on the other part of that zoning condition, how that's changed. So it could, which is not the answer you wanted. I apologize.
Any other questions? Okay. We'll
Like I
reserve-
said, we have Tommy Craven, the civil engineer for the project, and Reinhold Stevenson with Raymond Camp for the traffic engineer. If you have any questions for either one of those gentlemen, feel free. Thank you.
Okay, we'll reserve that time, and we'll hear from the neighbors. I have 4 people who have signed up to speak. Carol Mayer, Emily King, Robert Gilbert, and Josh Hansen. So, Tim, we have 8 minutes. Carol?
Actually, I'm deferring my time to Josh Hansen.
Okay. Let me, before we begin, is Emily King and Robert Gilbert going to speak?
Yes, I'm Robert Gilbert.
Okay, then who's Josh Hansen? Okay.
Mayor, councilors, yes, I'm Bob Gilbert, 1709 Dare Street. I live 2 blocks from the development. 214 neighbors involved in this 2.5-year process have asked the applicant to remove the Bickett Boulevard parking access for children's safety reasons and reduce the size and layout from overwhelming our neighborhood traffic and parking. They've refused for 2.5 years. We're not opposed to a well-planned mixed-use development. We are opposed to the NX4 rezoning, overdeveloping this property with 4 floors, allowing parking access 150 feet from the park children's area, and not providing adequate parking. The applicant recently dropped all parking conditions and the number of spaces in their application. No developer, I want to point out, has been chosen, so we strongly encourage you to make parking a condition based on a percentage of residences, not a specific number. The applicant's own July study shows the NX4 request will add 850 car trips a day to our surrounding streets, increasing traffic flow on those streets by 30 to 100%. But by rerouting the parking deck entrances to the Fairview side, Fairview currently handles 4 to 8 times the traffic of the others, would address our concerns about the overflow traffic and parking on the other street and surrounding neighborhoods. The IX3, as was pointed out, allows for 29 residences. NX4 requests 48 residences and double the retail. That request is simply too big. That's it. An NX3 rezoning would provide adequate parking, no Bickett access, and a workable solution addressing our neighbors' safety and traffic concerns, and apply Vision Zero to this project so that it does not endanger children and overwhelm our streets with overflow parking and excess traffic. Thank you.
Okay, Emily King.
My name is Dr. Emily King. I'm a child psychologist and parent who lives at 212 Bickett Boulevard, which is directly across from the street from the proposed rezoning. We bought our home 11 years ago, and our 15 and 10-year-old sons are growing up here. I'm a Raleigh native, and I value the growth of my hometown, and tonight I'm speaking on behalf of families raising children in our neighborhood. Roanoke Park is special. It's a long but narrow park surrounded by single-family homes filled with children and elderly. We don't mind our small backyards because we have the park. Our children walk to and from Underwood Elementary every day, play at the park after school, and are often back outside after dinner until dark. The zoning application states that businesses can remain open until 11 p.m. on school nights. We request this be reduced to 9 p.m. so our children can get adequate sleep. On the weekends, Roanoke Park attracts young families from around Raleigh, and it's common to see up to 50 preschoolers enjoying the park, kids on bikes and scooters, and residents walking their dogs. There are existing safety issues at the park you need to be aware of. There are no sidewalks on Greenwood or Cherokee. There are no fences on any side of the park, and there are inadequate use of speed bumps. Motorists unfamiliar with our neighborhood often drive the wrong way down one-way Greenwood and Cherokee. Due to these safety issues, we rely on each other to keep our children safe. Adding signage will not solve this problem because the children at the park are not yet reading and are too young to notice traffic danger until it's too late. As a community, we believe the only way to protect the health and safety of our children is to reduce the scope of the project, move the traffic entrance off of Bickett Boulevard and to Fairview Road, and reduce the business hours to 9 p.m. on school nights. Thank you. I can answer questions if you'd like.
Robert Gilbert. Josh Hanson. That's what happens when you go out of order.
Madam Mayor, esteemed council, I'm Josh Hanson. I live at 1509 Cherokee Drive. My home is about 230 feet from the site. I am an attorney. I handle some real estate land use related items, but I am not here in a representative capacity. I'm here as a neighbor and on behalf of folks who requested me to speak. We've hit kind of the main point. It's very shocking to come in here after all this time and hear that taking away the Bickett access may be on the table. It's shocking. It's a bit annoying. We have been asking for this consistently since day one. I hope it happens. But other than that, let me point out a few inconsistencies in the application. First of all, there's a representation that we are an R6. Our neighborhood is R6. We are not R6, we are R10. In addition to that, we are an NCOD, Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, which strictly limits our building height to 2 stories. The applicant has said that we are 3-story maximum, and his 4-story proposal provides a natural transition down to the IX5, which is on Capitol Boulevard. However, we are 2 stories. The natural transition here would be 3 stories. This property abuts the boundary of the NCOD. The UDO section 3.11 specifically states to limit overall scale, NX maximum height limits should be compatible with adjacent residential development. We are the adjacent residential. It's 2 stories. We would request that it be reduced to 3. I do believe that removing the access from Bickett and shifting all ingress egress over to Fairview takes away a lot of that concern. However, there is an inconsistency in the application. Next, there is heavy reliance by the applicant, and unfortunately by city staff, on the proposed BRT. As you all know, the BRT North has not yet been funded. It is a speculative plan at this point. There is actually a statement in the application that we will be within walking distance to the N2 station on the BRT North route. That does not exist. There is no station allocation on BRT. There won't be until it is funded, planned, and laid out. We're still considering alternatives. Relying on transportation hypotheticals as a justification for this development is just not right. And I ask that you don't put any weight into that credit, into the leaning on BRT, because it's just not accurate. To go from this site to Capitol Boulevard, where the BRT route may go, you would have to walk without sidewalks, over a train track, down a 25-foot hill that goes under the Fairview Avenue flyover. There's no walkable access. I guess if you have a mountain bike, you could try it, okay? It's not accessible. So all of the reliance by the applicant and the city are misplaced. I would like to also point out that just today, we received a notification that the previously marked restaurant space had been converted to retail, and I would be concerned that any of the conditions that we had negotiated concerning restaurant use would also have to be revisited if restaurants are not going to be a component of the plan going forward. We spent a lot of time early on in the process limiting hours of operation, noise, music, timing of lights, no neon lights, things of that nature. But then today it was eliminated. So we definitely want some time to be able to see exactly what their retail component consists of. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just want to put a couple of things on the table. The possible uses for restaurants. Restaurants are under the retail use. The hours of operations, the limitation on lights, the limitation on sound, everything is exactly as it has always been. It is not, that restriction has not changed. Josh mentions 4 stories. The building, the structure itself will be in fact 4 stories. One of the stories is below Bickett. So you will only see 3 stories on Bickett and 2 stories on Fairview. So I just want to make that very clear that that is the case. It is not a 4-story structure that is going to tower over Bickett. It is 3 stories on Bickett and it is conditioned that way. And so I just, again, I wanted to make sure we had that in there. And finally, I just want to remind you, Raleigh Parks Department has reviewed this case and does not see a negative impact on the park. I understand what the neighbors are saying, but your staff says there is not an issue. Thank you.
Could you, so is the 1-story underground, is that parking?
Yes, that is the commercial, that is the parking level for the commercial. If you pull into Fairview, then the parking lot is behind the building. Fairview and Bickett rises above Fairview. So it would be dug out there, so the commercial parking level would be underground to Bickett.
Okay, so my next question is, if we hold this, are you willing to seriously consider addressing some of the neighborhood concerns about Fairview and Bickett?
Yes. All that, and that's why if that is the way the council is pushing this project to go that way, to have one entrance off of Fairview instead of, I'm sorry, what the design professionals think is the better situation for the 2, then we're asking for the extra time to understand and to be able to condition correctly all the ramifications of that decision. So like I said before, there are 4 conditions that are currently referencing the Bickett driveway. So if that is the motion, if that is the feeling of the council to take that away, then we would have to modify those conditions because it would reference a driveway that's not that wouldn't be part of the design anymore.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Councilmember Jones and then Patton.
Pat, you can go first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say it sounds like the consensus at the table and the consensus among the neighborhood is that the number 1 concern is removing that access. And then there's a pretty close second that there'd be some condition that speaks to parking. I know that I listened to the committee meeting, there was a suggestion that some of it be designated as public parking, or that there at the very least be some designation about how many spots are anticipated. So it sounded like those 2 things prevail here at the table. Those were clear at the committee
Understood.
meeting. So,
And that's
Up
one
to
of
you,
the
Councilman.
situations we were talking about. If you're asking us to go down the path that there's no driveway on Bickett, then that may allow a few more parallel parking spaces on Bickett. So those are the kind of details we want the time to work out, at least take a swing on.
Councilmember Jones?
Thank you. I am struggling just because I understand what you're saying, that staff doesn't have an issue, and that's all true, but it's a piece of the puzzle. Our whole puzzle is not just what staff says. It does include, neighbors and all of this, and we have to make that decision holistically over how this goes. And there's a lot of impacts to this neighborhood that they don't feel heard, and it's coming up right at the last minute, which is it's frustrating. So the concern, and you just clarified it, so thank you so much for, I was gonna ask that, so I'm glad you did, which is if we do defer this, those are the things that have to be resolved.
We're sure going to try.
For everyone here.
We're sure going to try. We have been, during this 2-year period, we have been modifying the plan all along. Things like the lighting, the hours of operation, all that kind of stuff, and then we recently added, because it was asked of us, to do road improvements on Bickett and Greenwood. We have added that to the plan. So there has been movement along the way, but as we have said before, we were looking at it as one way, and so if we're trying to, as we've been doing the whole time,
can we go
keep
back to
trying.
what you said when you said try? You're going to try. How does that? What do you think the outcome? Is it more favorable that it will, or by try do you mean there's still an opportunity where we won't get the access just strictly on Fairview.
Changing the access point from Bickett to both on Fairview have questions and issues that we don't understand to ask yet. So we don't know if that's going to cause a backup on Fairview. We have to look at those kind of stuff. We don't know if there's any improvements that are going to need to be done to Fairview.
Sure. And so where I'm struggling is that because this has been what the neighbors have said from the get-go, the fact that we haven't looked at those alternatives in those 2 years when this has been the issue, that's where I'm confused, and I'm a little bit frustrated for neighbors because it feels like we're dragging this out another, however many, that's 2 weeks, and there's still not a guarantee that we can do that.
As an example, the Bickett driveway started out in a different place on Bickett, and then we revised it and changed it to include street improvements on Bickett and Greenwood. And so that specific example, there has been movement and change in the design along the way. So again, as we say before, the staff, we're hearing what staff tells us they want to do for driveway access, and we hear what the neighbors want to do for driveway access, and we've been trying to meld this, and not everyone's going to get what they want all the way along the way. So all I can say, we will continue to go through this. I just don't want to say that we can have an answer by the time you give us, whether it's hold the public hearing open or you send it to this committee. That time we'll have enough time to speak to the transportation department, the Raleigh Transportation Department, to make sure that making that change isn't going to cause an issue, an unforeseen issue, or another issue that we don't know that's out there right now. But we will do our best to make offers to the neighbors and hope we get closer.
Councilmember Melton?
I have a few thoughts. I want to start by saying that, I think more people being able to live by a park in a walkable neighborhood with a lot of amenities is a good thing. But we have to make sure that it's the right project and that the conditions are right. And you told us yourself at our committee meeting that the current owners have no plans to develop this site themselves.
Right.
So we are looking at a sale. So these conditions are incredibly important because they will stay with the site.
Yes.
And with all due respect to the design professionals and staff, they will not be the ones making this decision. Everyone sitting here at this table are the ones making this decision.
That's why we're asking for the extra time.
And I think that what you've heard at committee and probably here today is, we don't often get cases like this where the residents come to us with, here are a few things you can do to make the case better for us. A lot of times folks come here and just say no. These folks have been working with you for a very long time.
Correct.
They have very clear asks, and I agree with them. I think that the access on Bickett should be closed. I think all of vehicular traffic should be on Fairview. And if you can come back with a condition on that and a few conditions to address some of his other concerns, then I would be happy to support the project. But, I think the conditions are really important. And I also don't think you have to solve every single problem because, as you said, the owners are planning to sell it. So the conditions are important, and then whoever decides to develop it can figure out how to make a project work based on the conditions that have been put on the case. And so to the extent that you need feedback for me personally, I would like to see Bickett closed and vehicular traffic on Fairview and conditions that address those issues.
Okay.
I have a question, and this might be staff. What can be developed there right now by right?
So the zoning is currently a general use IX3 district. So anything permitted in the IX district, so the industrial uses we discussed earlier, retail and other commercial uses, as well as residential if it's sort of above the ground story, and up to 3 stories.
So say up to 3 stories can be built there by right now
That's right.
with no conditions related to retail, restaurants, lighting, anything.
Only the requirements, the EO and limited use standards for some uses, yes. That's right.
Okay, so that is I'm going to look to some of the neighbors right now. if this case were denied, somebody could come in and build by right without any of these conditions. I think I've made it very clear that I want to see action that would address some of these neighborhood concerns, and I think we've spelled that out pretty clearly. But I just wanted to know what could be built by right, because I've seen cases where they've been denied, somebody comes back and builds something, and then neighborhoods are even more upset because they're getting exactly what they don't want. So that would be my concern.
Yeah, I appreciate that context. I'm still confused and I'm frustrated. So as we move forward and you come back with this, I'm to like the end of the rope. I've been there at all those CAC meetings. I want to know that the final decision of what you can do can be given to us in that, and when you come back to us. How long do you need?
I would say no more than 30 days.
I was going to suggest giving them at least 30 days, or even the second meeting in, not the second, the third week in November, coming back. So that way we couldn't quite get there. So that's what I was going to suggest, is like 6 weeks.
6 weeks. So over the 30 days, the 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Right before Thanksgiving.
Just to add on, sorry.
No, go ahead.
To add on to that, staff, can you help us back plan? If this is going to be heard on the 21st, then unsigned conditions will need to be submitted by
November 10th.
the November 10th. Can you get your conditions in by November 10th to our staff? Okay.
Well, then I think that, oh, hang on, I'm sorry. I see and I know we've listened to the applicant a lot, and so I'd like to hear from the resident Josh?
Thank you. I just want to reply to a couple things and also address the mayor's question. In 2016, when we had the citywide rezonings, the city took it upon themselves to make sure that this was IX3 for that reason, 3 stories IX. We understand and we support an NX designation. We understand the potential for noxious uses. However, we're not as concerned about that because of how the market would probably affect that. I do want to comment on 4 stories being too high once more, and I heard Chuck's explanation that, well, 2 of it's here and 1 of it's underground. It's still a 4-story approval. It's still a 4-story development. 3 stories is more appropriate on the site. The city's decided that 8 years ago, and it is consistent with UDO section 3.11, that we go with the adjacent residential. So NX3 is appropriate here.
So I just want to clarify.
Again, we are in support of NX.
Right, and I wanted to clarify, because that was actually a question, I'm so glad that you came up. You guys understand as a residents that IX, the whole zoning, and what if, to the mayor's point, if we denied it today and IX came, how would you feel?
Well, it's a concern that we've all had, but the reality of the 3 potential uses that would go away, there's probably 5, but two of them are not realistic on that site. Large car crushing places, rock quarry, less than 1 acre wouldn't be approved. The 3 that are available, we're talking about a bar rather than a restaurant. That's 1. It's still allowed in the NX. It would just need, a limited.
Have to be part of a restaurant. The bar would have to be part of a restaurant.
Well, that would be permitted, but you can get a limited pass. The point is, there are still allowances. They're not permitted uses, but they're still allowed with either a special use or a limited use permit. So it's not as great a concern. I do respect the question, but it's not as great of a concern. And if turning this down and making them come back to the drawing board with a more reasonable plan is what the council likes, I think we would support that. But yeah, the 3 potential uses are not necessarily viable in this spot.
Okay, I think we have heard the concerns. What I'm going to suggest is that we hold this. I'll hold the hearing open. We will reschedule this for November 21st. Please get your conditions in by November 10th and continue to work with the neighbors and see what we can come up with. Okay? Thank you.
This is very short. I want to be very clear in terms of the neighborhood. The neighborhood absolutely prefers NX3, not really NX4, over IX3, and they're very clear in the neighborhood that that's what we want.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is that, do we need a vote on that? Yeah, I believe.
Do you want me to motion
Yes.
for it? I do.
I've made the motion. You just want to second it?
I will. I just wanted to say one last thing. I'm sorry. I feel the frustration, neighbors. I understand how long this has taken, and I think giving this one last opportunity to get your voices heard is impactful. I think there is an opportunity because, as we just discussed, we would prefer NX over IX, and I don't want to lose that for you by denying it right now. So I think giving this extra time to have those conversations is going to be really, really beneficial for everyone, and knowing that that's going to be the last time that it comes to us. Okay. Okay.
Yep. Second?
All right. Second the motion to move to what you said.
November, yes,
There.
thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Councilmember Melton?
No, I just said aye.
Okay, thank you. As I said, the next item, Z2 23 Litchford Road has been withdrawn. So we will next go to rezoning Z423. This is the east side of Creedmoor Road, District A. Thank you all for being here tonight. And as Councilmember Jones said, let's continue these important conversations.
Good evening, Bynum Walter, Raleigh Planning and Development. This is rezoning Z423. This is 3 lots on the east side of Creedmoor Road, north of Sherborne Place. It's about 1.5 acres going from R4 to OX3. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. Planning Commission recommends approval. And you might want to know about the dissenting vote. The dissenting vote here really wanted more information about the site plan than is typically required by the zoning process. I think was just frustrated with the state of that zoning allows as many options as it does.
Who was the dissenting vote?
It's Mr. Peeler, Reeves Peeler. So this is just south of Millbrook. You can see there's institutional to the north, some moderate scale residential to the west, low scale residential immediately surrounding, and a couple of views of the site. So they've offered a buffer here along to the adjacent properties on Sherborne to the east, and they've specified planning requirements, and they've said that that would be installed once construction of whatever happens on the site is complete, and that the property owner would be responsible for replacing diseased or damaged trees. They've also limited noise producing, site preparation, and construction activities during particular times of the day and days of the year. So the change here from residential 4 to OX3 increases the maximum number of units. There's no office permitted currently, so that would be increased significantly. And OX3 would allow a modest amount of retail, 4,000 square feet or 15%. Number of consistent policies here, no inconsistent policies were identified. The Planning Commission does recommend approval, and I'm happy to answer questions for you before you open the public hearing.
Any questions? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, hi. I noticed in the staff report that there were concerns around the nature of the way the condition was written and the enforceability of it. Has that been corrected?
There have been some amendments. I think there probably could be some tightening of language there.
Okay. Got it.
Such as? Can you be more specific?
My recollection is that the planting details as written were tough for staff to interpret and enforce at time of site plan.
Was that communicated to the applicant?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Jones?
I know this street well, and it's the dividing line between mine and Mary's districts. This is as we're growing, it's a heavy trafficked area. And I'm wondering, can you speak to any traffic improvements that could possibly be made, maybe not with this case, but are there goals as we move forward with all of the residences that we are adding to this area? It's getting really bulky over there. So is there anyone from traffic that can possibly speak to this area?
That's a great question. I would defer to my colleagues in transportation. I believe Kenneth Ritchie is here tonight. He may appreciate the opportunity to collect his thoughts while you open the public hearing.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Is that true? Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I am going to open the hearing. We have Derek Baker and Christopher Olmsted signed up in support, and 2 people signed up in opposition, Gary Schwoonover and DeMonte Crawford.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and honorary council members. I'm Christian Olmsted, representing Derek Baker. I'm a builder. Derek wanted to be here tonight, but it got rescheduled and he had a family trip planned. He did have the opportunity to speak with Councilmember Black last week. Seemed like a favorable conversation. This got started with Derek just wanting a home for his business, and so he found the property, and it looked like a good home for his business. And so he bought one of the properties, the middle one, 5306, with the intention of building a 2-story office building. His company owner occupying more than half of it, the entire upstairs, and then leasing out the downstairs. His desire was something along the lines of medical or professional office space. During the neighborhood meetings, one of the lots to the north, 5310, became available, and so Derek purchased that and intends to do the same thing a similar thing on that property, and then 5300 actually became available too. And he doesn't own that yet. There's a contingent offer in place. If Derek gets that one, then his plan would be to build 3 very similar buildings, one on each parcel, starting on the south lot, 5300, and building in phases, eventually taking over 5306 and building there, and then finally at 5310. The traffic, we were told that the impact didn't trigger a traffic study, so that's why that has not been done. However, I could speak to a little bit to the traffic patterns. There's a stub out on the north end built by the licensing board for general contractors that owns that building. And it's our impression that Raleigh wanted them to put that stub out heading in the southern direction toward 5310. We do intend to connect to that stub out. In addition to another entrance on Sherborne on the south side, and then the driveway that's existing at 5306 off of Creedmoor. So it would have 3 entrances and exits off of the 3 lots, if that makes sense. We think that we would need to extend a deceleration lane from Sherborne, where it's already like a bus lane, and extend that up at least through 5310 until it gets to our inlet, our driveway. And then I'd like to speak real quick to the landscape plan. There is a landscape buffer. It's pretty defined from our point of view, but we actually agreed with the neighbors who are selling 5300, and that's that larger pizza-shaped lot that is the vast majority of our neighbor. We have an agreement in place to beef up the landscape buffer in addition to everything that Raleigh requires. We're going to put some tall, I think it's arborvitae trees or something there to help with noise and privacy. We did agree to some things like speed bumps and limiting the construction noise and times of that during construction. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions? Councilmember Harrison?
And this really might go back to staff. So I'm just curious about the vegetative buffer. I did read it, and it sounds clear enough to me, and I'm just curious if staff could provide the concerns that have been raised to make us aware.
I was reviewing details of the case with Mr. York. I just want to make sure I understand your question, which is that you're wanting to understand what was the concern about the vegetative buffer condition as written. We were just conferring. I do think they ended up making some amendment to improve clarity. I think Planning Commission was looking for a little bit more detail, particularly around, there's language in here about a protective yard, but it's not particularly defined which protective yard we're referencing in the code. I think that was the big concern there.
And so could they choose a particular protective yard? Because, I mean, they've got the tree species. They have two that are allowed according to the condition. But the protective yard, that's beyond that tree buffer?
Right.
Okay. And what would be the options of protective yards that they could choose?
Just from some of the set that are defined in the code.
Okay. But there would, and how, can you tell me how wide that would be? And I'm sorry, is it on the sides? Are we talking, or is it, could you just show me on the map where that would be?
Yeah. So they're specifying along here, along their border with their Sherborne neighbors, is where they're saying they would have the planting.
Okay. And that's where they would have those specific trees that they've mentioned, plus a wider protective yard. Okay. And can you just tell me again a couple different options of the protective yards, just as examples that they could do?
I'm going to have to look at the code for specific feet details.
Okay.
Yep.
Councilmember Patton, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say maybe Mr. Ritchie is ready while Bynum's reviewing the code for the vegetative buffer.
Just real quick, our understanding is that we can build a 10-foot masonry wall, and then there would be a 10-foot buffer on our side of the masonry wall. So the masonry wall would be not on the property line because there's actually a sewer easement that goes through there, and it's a 20 feet wide, 10 feet on the neighbors, 10 feet on ours. And so there's a 10-foot buffer already, and then we could build the masonry wall, and then there would be a 10-foot landscape buffer yet. So our parking lot or anything wouldn't be able to start until about 20 feet off the property line, plus the thickness of the masonry wall.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kenneth Ritchie with Transportation. Looking at this section of Creedmoor Road, Councilmember Jones certainly noted with the amount of development that's going on. I do know that we have, within the course of the last 3 years, I think there have been 3 signal warrant analyses that have been done at Sherborne Place, most recently in April of this year, with some of these planned developments in there that unfortunately still has not triggered the warrants for a signal in that location. What I can say is, depending on the tier that this would come in from a site plan standpoint, there could be infrastructure improvements along the frontage. This being a DOT road, and they will likely be looking to access coming out to Creedmoor, they will have to go through the department for driveway permitting. There could be improvements, spot improvements, turn lanes, other that they may be required during that process as well.
Great, thank you so much. And I do understand that this is a much smaller development, and by no means am I wanting them to solve any of the traffic concerns. I just bring that because on the other side of the street, we have a rezoning coming up, and they did speak to the signal, because that's Magnolia Glen is really concerned about the signal. And you guys said that at that neighborhood meeting. Can you tell me what those triggers are and how close it was to that trigger?
So I do not have that information with me right now, but certainly we can get that and follow up.
Yeah, and it's mainly for that side, but I just thought you might have it now. But thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant?
I feel like I have much better information now. I apologize for the confusion earlier. So the language we were asking them to strike from the condition that's in the packet tonight is at the end of the condition, and it talks about, it's the portion that says, it starts with the purpose of this buffer shall be to provide a privacy hedge, and then it shall be in lieu of the standard landscaping requirements of a protective yard. So the zoning here that they're asking for, the OX3 and the residential zoning that's adjacent, requires the neighborhood transition requirement, right? And so what they're trying to do with this condition is say, instead of the neighborhood transition requirement, we're going to do this other thing. And we don't think they can actually do that through the zoning condition. And that was the comment that we were offering to them. They can make specifications about which neighborhood transition technique they're going to use, whether it's going to be the type 1 with the wall and the 10-foot, or type 2 with the fence with the 20-foot, or type 3 that's 50 feet of planted area, right? But the way the condition is written, they're saying, I don't think they're actually, they're specifying a 20-foot planted buffer that doesn't include the fence, right? So I think the planting that they're specifying is probably more dense than what's required by code, but they aren't offering the fence. It's just a different thing, and we don't typically allow zoning conditions to modify the code like that.
And so to clarify, would this condition hold legally, what they've said? Or is that the concern, that you wouldn't even, couldn't get permitted?
Thank you.
The concern was, David York, sorry, City Attorney's Office, was that the condition is worded conflicted, or could be read to conflict with the current code. And this is not a provision of the UDO that you can revise by zoning condition to make it less restrictive. And it could be interpreted depending on what kind of transitional protective yard they were proposing. It could be less restrictive as written. And so that's why we wanted them to remove the in lieu of, that if they wanted to add a buffer that was in addition to, that's fine. Or if they wanted to specify which protective yard they wanted to provide, that was fine. But the in lieu gives the appearance that they may not have to comply with the code. The way that condition would be interpreted, and Justin will kick me if I'm wrong, but the way we normally would interpret that is to ignore the in lieu of, okay? And they'd have to do what the code says, regardless of what that condition says. Just like we do with legacy zoning conditions. If they're less restrictive than the code, they have to comply with the code.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that was a better answer than the last one I gave.
Real quick, it sounds like maybe semantics. We definitely don't intend on doing something instead of the code. Our intention all along was to stick with Plan 1, the masonry wall, and then in addition to that, add some taller trees for the neighbor's sake in that space. So we can get rid of the in lieu part, no problem.
Okay, want to get to those who signed up in opposition. What? Yeah. Yeah, Gary Schwoonover. And I don't see Del Monte Crawford here, so.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Gary Schoonover. I live on the north end of the property, but on the east side at 2616 Sherborne Place. I've been there for 31 years. I've raised my family there. This is an old neighborhood. There are no sidewalks. There are no curbs. People use it for a cut through all the time. They've got 500 apartments that they're getting ready to start building, probably 200 feet just south of there. They're talking about some more apartments across the street. It's a growing area. I'm good with that, but this is not right. I mean, the safety issue that goes with this is just not right. There's a cut-through road, he called it a stub out, that they put only because the property that owner at 5310 negotiated that. That was the only reason, so they could have backdoor access. Once they open that up, that's going to open up a backdoor entrance to a cut-through that's going to take it to the front door of a 24/7 Harris Teeter, cutting through, because that stoplight at Millbrook and Creedmoor backs up way past south of Sherborne Place. And that was a F- rated intersection years ago, before even some of the other development started. I own the property, like I said. The lady that owns the Triangle property, they're adjacent to it, is a lady that's selling a house, or selling a property at 5300. It's a heavily wooded lot. There's no house on it. There's never been a house on it for the last 50 years that I know about. The first thing the owner of 5306 did was cut every tree on the property and butchered it. And that opens up so much noise through my neighborhood. I can only imagine that's what he's going to do to 5300. And when he creates that cut through, it's going to be a very unsafe situation. I'm opposed to this. I don't see where this would be a great thing for the city, to take out a half an acre of trees, open up a totally unsafe situation. There was a fatality collision there several years ago at the intersection of Sherborne and Creedmoor Road. To go out on the Creedmoor Road, you take your life in your own hand, because this should be a stoplight there. They've danced around it for years. I guess someone else have to get hurt before they do something about it. At the worst case scenario, I would suggest they do a right in and right out. They've already got 2 driveways on Creedmoor Road. They could do a right in at 5306 and do a right out at 5310. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think Councilmember Melton, you had a comment?
Well, the applicant said we can drop the in lieu of, no problem, but that would require us holding the case, new conditions. But it sounds like staff is just saying we're just going to ignore the in lieu of. So I don't really know that that needs to happen, because staff's like, we're going to apply this and we're just going to pretend that's not in there, basically, is what we heard. Pat's shaking his head. So I just wanted to clarify that they're going to ignore your in lieu of. So you may not have to take it out, is what they've told us. That was all I wanted to clarify.
Okay. Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, in consideration of the right in, right out comment from the resident, Mr. Ritchie, you said they would have to get their driveways approved by NCDOT. I know that's not your agency, but in your best musings, is that likely to be similar to what they suggest?
If I had to guess, based off the current condition of Creedmoor Road, any driveway access that would come out to Creedmoor would be right in, right out.
Yeah.
De facto anyway, because it's a median divided section.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Melton.
In Councilmember Black's absence, it's my understanding she has met with the applicant and is in favor of this case. I understand some of the traffic concerns. I do think that those will need to be addressed a little more holistically. Certainly, this 3-lot site's not going to substantially change that, and it sounds like they have to work with DOT anyway. So with that, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 3rd, 2023, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda under recommended action.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Patton. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-3 with Councilmember Harrison and Jones in opposition. Okay.
I just want to note that I'm just wanted to put kind of a no out there, because Councilmember Black is not here, and so I feel like I can't fully understand maybe concerns of District A, although my understanding was she didn't have any issues with this case. So.
Okay, next we go to Z1723, west side of Jones Franklin Road. No one has signed up in opposition on this case.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just over 2 acres from OX3 with conditions to OX4 with conditions. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan, but inconsistent with the future land use map. Planning Commission does recommend approval. So this is the west side of Jones Franklin, the south side of Centerview, and the north side of Woodsdale. Woodsdale dead ends 2 parcels to the west of this, so very short street, and then Centerview wraps around into the Office Park area to the west here. So view of the site from, you kind of get a sense of where this is in relationship to the Beltline and I-40 and that Office Park that I mentioned, and then a couple of views of the site from Centerview, from Jones Franklin, and from Woodsdale. So they have offered a condition here to prohibit some uses that otherwise would be allowed in OX. The change in entitlement here, the maximum number of units goes up incrementally. The office square footage, this similarly goes up in a limited way. And then retail limited to 4,000 square feet or 15% in the OX district. So this is inconsistent with the future land use map here. This is office research and development, which otherwise would not suggest that residential is appropriate here. And so the OP zoning district is considered the most consistent option here, which is why the OX request with no prohibition on residential would be considered inconsistent. Otherwise, consistent with the plan, and so that future land use map and zoning consistency and the conditional use district consistency are flagging here because of that inconsistency with the office research and development designation. Nonetheless, Planning Commission recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have before the public hearing.
Councilmember Harrison, then Patton.
Yeah, Bynum, I know we had been talking a little bit about vegetative buffers and tree preservation on this one, so this might feel a little bit like deja vu of the last case. I'd like to get into the weeds on exactly how some of the changes in the zoning conditions are going to affect tree preservation and frontage. Planning sent me a detailed table, and I don't know if you have access to that or if you can just kind of take us through that.
Sure. So I will say up front, there are a number of conditions on this site already. There are 20 conditions in place currently. And so, Councilmember Patton, I think you're really asking most about the ones related to trees and open space, not the ones around materials. There's just a lot in these conditions currently. And so the change, I will say the change in tree preservation, the current conditions specify that trees of a certain size within 30 feet of the western boundary have to be preserved. The total area of that area for consideration is about 7,600 square feet. The tree conservation requirements in the code require TCA of about 8,900 square feet. So I characterize that as an increase in tree preservation area. There's no open space requirement under the current zoning conditions, but in the application of the UDO, they'd be required to set aside 10%. The existing buffers, the streetscape specifications, particularly for Woodsdale, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. The transitional protective yard along the Woodsdale specifies it has to be at least 20 feet deep. They could have a narrower transition. They would still have to, remember we just talked about neighborhood transition. They can do the 10 with the wall, 20 with the fence, 50 with just planting. And so the old conditions said they had to, it had to be at least 20 feet wide, and they couldn't reduce it with the fence, right? So I think there's some variation there in what you might get now. You know you're going to get at least the 10 feet in the wall. You might get just 50 feet of planting. And then the streetscape specifies plantings along Woodsdale, actually quite dense, 80 shrubs per linear foot and 7 trees per 100 linear feet, and 7 trees per 100 linear feet. And the anticipated outcome of street tree requirements just on Woodsdale is about 6 trees. The Woodsdale frontage is about a little bit over 200 feet. So in the old requirement, you would have seen maybe as many as 14 trees. I think our tree planting standards are pretty, are organized in such a way that trees have enough space to become big and majestic. And then they would also have tree planting requirements along Jones Franklin and Centerview as part of code requirement because of the rezoning. So regardless. So I think I would question whether that density is desirable of planting. That's a lot of plant material snuggled up together.
That makes sense. And could you just talk again to the frontage of Jones Franklin? You were saying that there would be some trees required there, but my understanding is that now parking would be allowed right in the front, and in the past that would not have been the case.
Right. And I should correct myself. The Jones Franklin frontage is state maintained, and they would have to have dialogue with the state about street trees on Jones Franklin. But Centerview and Woodsdale would have street tree planting requirements. Your question about the current conditions prohibit parking between Jones Franklin and the building, and I think it's described as like behind and beside in the conditions, and there was be no limit in light of rezoning.
Okay.
I mean, there's a parking setback, but there's nothing that keeps parking from being between any building facade and any particular right-of-way.
Yeah, I think that might be the only hang-up that I have, and I'm curious when the applicant does speak about the frontage plans, because to have parking in front there, at least for anyone who's going up and down Jones Franklin right now, this is like a treed corridor in a lot of respects. I think it will be a less desirable corridor in that way. So I'm thinking more like the, is it Parkway frontage where you've got the trees kind of in front, and then I think I'm saying that wrong.
So the Parkway frontage has a 50-foot planting buffer required along the primary, whatever's identified as the primary frontage for the parcel. The parking limited frontage limits the amount of parking between the building and the street to 2 bays and a single drive aisle. And then your more urban frontages, like your green frontage, urban limited or urban general, would limit parking between the building and the street. That's also something they could also offer via zoning condition. We actually see that pretty frequently offered as a conditional offer in zoning cases.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, I will open the hearing then. As I said, nobody is here to speak in opposition. Brendy Vega.
Good evening. Council members, my name is Brendy Vega. I am with Withers Ravenel, representing the owner, Deborah Ferris, who is also here. Mr. and Mrs. Ferris purchased this property with the intent to build an office building. They have not done so. So 17 years after having the property rezoned, they are ready to put it on the market to the right buyer with this new zoning request. As you heard from staff, the request would increase the allowable height from 3 to 4 stories and would remove the conditions originally placed on the parcel when it was rezoned in 2006. Speaking to the change from 3 to 4 stories, the parcels adjacent to the site in the R4 district would kick in those neighborhood transitions in UDO section 3.5. This transition would limit the height on the site, or the buffer. The conditions we are proposing will prohibit some uses, but mainly will allow residential to be a permitted use. As you can imagine, this area has seen some change over the years, and a non-residential or residential use would be consistent with the change in this area. This is an area that's uniquely bound by 440, 40, and Lake Johnson. So it's a little, I guess, enclave between those areas. Not far from this site to the north, you can see on the aerial I'm showing that was not on staff's, is that here is the 4-story building of multifamilies to the north. And just to give you some context, that's the view of that. This is a view facing northwest of those apartments at Capitol Center Drive. This view also gives you a good idea of what half of a 6-lane median divided roadway will look like. And I say half because if you're looking at the site, only the west side has been improved. And so this site will also have to provide half of that 6-lane median divided, which is called for in the city's transportation plan. As Bynum mentioned, this site is bound by 3 frontages. So while it is only 2 acres in size, 2.04, it does have 3 roads that will be subject to right-of-way dedication and possibly improvements to accommodate their ultimate build-out. Recently, a traffic signal was installed at the corner of Centerview and Jones Franklin. Along this stretch of road, there are only 4 parcels fronting Jones Franklin that remain with the R4 zoning. With multifamily across the street in the Centerview Apartments and multifamily to the north, we believe this site would be well suited to either residential or commercial. We respectfully request your approval of the rezoning request this evening, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Harrison.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this case. I know that just kind of streamlining it and removing a lot of these old conditions will make it a smoother property for, opportunities for redevelopment, and I understand that interest. I'm curious if you all would be amenable to working through the frontage, to think through, like I said, more of like a parkway type frontage, because personally, I think having a parking lot in the front there is not desirable aesthetically or environmentally. I used to live next door in the Centerview Apartments, so I know the area well and just the feel of it. There is a lot of change going on there, but I still think the tree-lined streets are a big benefit in that area, and there's been a lot of changes as you go down towards the 440 interchange. It's horribly ugly. And so I just want to give these folks a little bit of that respite before they get to 440. So would you all be open to working through that? And hopefully we could get you back in here as soon as possible, if we could work that condition out.
My only concern with that is that there is quite a bit of frontage dedication, and this site is going to go below those 2 acres once that frontage is dedicated. And we haven't done a site plan. We don't know how much frontage is going to be, what the depth of the property is going to be. And certainly, as we mentioned to you in our conversation, this site would probably be more suitable to be recombined with the 2 adjacent residential pieces. So I'd have to talk to Deborah to see if she's amenable to that, adding that condition, but certainly we can look into it.
And I'd also like to hear from staff about the road improvements and how that might affect their development, because you're mentioning that Jones Franklin is planned to be 6 lanes.
Yes.
And I would just wonder if staff could speak to that as well.
So any road improvements would be consistent with the 6-lane designation through here. Haven't looked specifically at how much widening there would be along Jones Franklin associated with that, but certainly that is the classification that would be consistent with what we've seen DOT kind of delivering with the interchange projects through this area. Also noting that with that kind of neighborhood level street, certainly without looking at it, I don't know exactly what, because that's not going to be classified per our street plan, so it would be based off of potential uses and trips along that stub that would determine exactly what the requirement would be at site plan stage. But it would be likely in our neighborhood level streets, so maximum probably is going to be looking at about 64 feet of right of way.
And so 6 lanes, currently most of Jones Franklin, correct me if I'm wrong, is 3? And then sometimes you have a turn lane here and there that's added?
That I believe is correct. I haven't looked at that in detail, but yes.
And is there any opportunity to not go to 6 lanes on Jones Franklin?
We would have to go look at the Triangle Regional Model and kind of see what some of the future volume projections are through this area to kind of see what would be warranted from a classification standpoint. I do know we typically, when we look at the 3-lane section there today, would be consistent with the 2-lane divided. Typically, we're going to want to be less than 20,000 cars per day on that. I'm not exactly sure what the 4-lane threshold would be, but certainly that would also be a conversation we'd have to have with the department.
Yeah, I mean, my preference would be more trees and not more lanes of road. I think it's relatively smooth getting through there at the moment, but obviously things can change as development is planned. So I guess at this point, I would really like to hold this case just to better understand those plans, what are the opportunities there, and how that does impact your property. I want to understand that if, you're going to have to give up a significant portion for that right of way. But I just want to put on the record, I don't know that that's a great use of the space.
And that has nothing to do with the rezoning. That would have to be a different consideration. And quite frankly, I'm frustrated with road widenings. It seems like that's where we put all our money instead of trying to improve our roads. All right, so is that a motion then?
Yeah, and do I need to give a date for?
Yes.
I'm just thinking, so if it was in 2 weeks, would there be time to make changes? By Friday. So that would be up to y'all if you felt like that was something we could work through by Friday, or if we should do it a month out.
On the 27th. So 14 from here, or November 7th is your next option.
November 7th.
That might make more sense, and hopefully we can talk to DOT as well. And again, what their plans are, I realize y'all don't have any power over that, and so I don't want to hold you up because of them.
Okay.
So yes, motion to hold until November 7th. Thank you.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous. You've heard the concerns from the district counselor, so please feel free to have conversations with staff and others as we move this forward. Thank you. Okay, finally, we have text change TC 223 Transit Overlay District. TOD revisions. No one has signed up in support or opposition.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Justin Rametto with Planning and Development. Just a little bit of background and history on this item. It's a text amendment that is revising and updating the Transit Overlay District regulations that were originally adopted in October 2021. Those rules were crafted after the equitable development around transit planning process and the adoption of the equitable transit-oriented guidebook, also in 2021. The overlay has since been mapped on the southern and western routes and is, as you know, in the process of being mapped along New Bern under current consideration by the Planning Commission currently. It's a brief summary of what those existing rules do. They apply the mixed-use standards in residential districts to encourage density. There are urban street frontage requirements to promote walkability and comfort for pedestrians. There's also an affordability height bonus that's provided in mixed-use districts. Here's some detail on those height bonuses. There's actually two, one for affordable housing, one for fully non-residential development. For affordable housing, there's a 50% height bonus of 20% of the units in those bonus floors are affordable. So in a 5-story zoning district, could go up to 8 stories if 20% of the units in those 3 bonus stories were affordable. In an entirely non-residential development, there's a 30% bonus. So in that 5-story district, you could go to 7. In either of those scenarios, a decimal point rounds up to the nearest whole floor. So. There are other rules that prohibit certain residential and car-centric uses. There is a minimum height of 2 stories. There is an allowance for some limited non-residential uses in RX and OX to be larger than what would otherwise be permitted. And then there's some special permissions given to nonconformities as well. So the first and third bullets highlighted there are really the subject of this text change, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on those over the next few slides. Here's just a brief comparison of the nonconformities, though. Again, the TOD is more lenient with respect to these. Biggest differences are that if a use or structure is destroyed or torn down voluntarily, it can be replaced in the TOD. Even if that demolition is voluntarily, that's not permitted elsewhere in the code. There's no limit to the amount of expansion that the Board of Adjustment can grant through a special use permit. There is a 25% limit elsewhere, and the reestablishment period has been doubled from 1 year to 2 years. So here's a list of really 3 items included in this revisions and update. One is to remove the prohibition on 1 and 2 unit living uses. Second is to permit up to 10,000 square feet of non-residential space in the apartment building type. And then third are some just clarifications and restructuring to accommodate those first 2. And I can go into detail on each one of those as well. So 1 and 2 unit living, they're currently prohibited. Obviously, that prohibition has existed, and it's really to encourage denser development within the TOD that supports its goals. It means that when the TOD has been mapped or will be mapped in the future, that these existing uses become non-conforming. Even though those non-conforming uses do have special permissions, as we just went over, as we went through the station area planning process along New Bern, staff has realized that allowing them by right wouldn't significantly hinder the TOD. It was a frequent concern of residents that we heard as we went through that process as well. And I would just point out that these uses are allowed in all other mixed-use districts, including downtown. And so we feel like allowing them in the TOD, again, isn't a significant hindrance to furthering its goals. So as far as limited uses go, commercial uses in RX and OX are permitted, but limited to when certain conditions are met. The 2 of those at issue with this text change are that they can only be on the ground floor corner unit of an apartment building type at the intersection of 2 public streets, and also capped at 4,000 square feet in size. The existing TOD rules attempted to exempt those certain uses, the ones on the left of the screen there, from those two standards. So health club, doctor's office, hair salon, et cetera, need not be in a ground floor corner unit of an apartment building, need not be limited to 4,000 square feet either. The issue with that is that there is no upper limit or otherwise any limitation on the size of those non-residential units. And so it begs the question of at what point is an apartment building no longer an apartment building? It's further complicated by the fact that mixed use and general buildings are prohibited in RX. So the solution was either to allow mixed use in general buildings in RX, which we didn't feel like would be consistent with what the RX district is intended to do. So the solution proposed here is just to say, okay, you can have non-residential uses in an apartment building type, and they can be anywhere within the building. They can be larger than 4,000 square feet, but they can't be larger than 10,000 square feet. And that number was arrived at just as being kind of the typical size of a retail pharmacy, your typical Walgreens or CVS like you see in the image there. I'll just briefly go over the list of clarifications. These are, I do want to iterate that these are not policy changes. They're really just aimed at resolving conflict or ambiguity that might exist today. So first is some language in section 117B. That's being inserted because the TOD, just like any other overlay districts, NCODs, et cetera, can be either more or less restrictive than the base zoning. So it's not always the case that 100% of the time the more stringent regulation applies. So that's the reason for that. The next is a clarification that the infill rules don't apply in the TOD. Again, that was always kind of how the text change was written. If you recall, infill regulations apply to residential zoning districts, and in the TOD, residential districts abide by the mixed use standards. So again, just kind of making that clarification so it's clear. And then 551, also being revised, is for clarification on permitted and prohibited uses. Again, the TOD allows some uses that the underlying zoning district may not allow, and prohibits, and there may be cases where the TOD prohibits uses that the underlying district allows. And so there's language just clarifying there that whatever the TOD says is the correct application. These sections are being reorganized. Again, no policy or regulatory change. And then finally, since 1 and 2 unit living would be permitted, we wanted to make clear that those uses would not have to abide by the urban frontage and minimum height requirements of the TOD. So single family home or duplex would not have to comply with things like build to, transparency, et cetera. It could also be a one-story building, would not have to be a 2-story minimum. The Planning Commission and Text Change Committee, and its Text Change Committee both recommended unanimous approval. And I think that is it, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the text change.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Definitely thank you for the presentation, for the work that you and the rest of their team have worked on this. I was in the meetings where this came out of, as far as the impact along the New Bern Avenue corridor and things of that nature, and those feeling they would lose their home because it did prohibit single-family homes. But I'm glad we were able to arrive to this point, to this place. I realized that we want a transit corridor that is supported by the homes along it and even businesses along that corridor, and that there's been some apprehension thinking that allowing single-family homes, could hinder that. But I see staff upon review and looking, you see that there may not be a hindrance. So I appreciate that information, and at the appropriate time, I would like to make a motion.
Okay, Councilmember Harrison and then Patton.
Yeah, I just want to note for the public, I know there's been a lot of conversation around the TOD and New Bern TRD, and when I look at the public engagement on this particular revision, it does have a lot of different topics there that I don't think are necessarily about this particular change. So I just want to note that there are a lot of concerns that go beyond this, but this particular change that's being offered, I think is reasonable and in the spirit of what, community residents have been bringing out.
Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, similar. I was going to say something similar. I hear what you are describing, that there was already the opportunity for, if in the event of a tear down, the single family or duplex could have been rebuilt, but I do think this clarifies for residents and will provide some ease, so I appreciate the modification. But I will also note a lot of the comments in the engagement report are around the consideration for where there are conflicting overlay districts, which one is the prevailing. Just flag that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing and close the hearing.
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 3rd, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay, that is our last item this evening. Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, before we adjourn, these conversations around these TOD revisions have, highlighted, I think, we know that the maps are coming up from Planning Commission not too long from now, and these are big changes that we know there's lots of community input about. In specific, I know there's lots of community concern around development pressures created on this corridor, and I also know that the city is doing things to try to keep people in their homes to mitigate the impacts, but I would love the opportunity to have more conversation and more understanding about how all of the pieces fit together, right? I think it's really easy for residents to get lost in the sauce and the sort of acronym word salad, BRT, TOD, EDAT, all of it. And so I'm hoping the council will be amenable to taking this up in Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities Committee this month or next, just in my specific focus on what are the supportive programming that we've got that we're putting in place along these corridors to support residents staying in their homes. Would everyone be amenable to that?
Right now, that's all coming to us and will be coming to us. Concerned about I'm having trouble with the why and the timing. Not the discussion, but the timing of it. Councilmember Melton?
I was going to say, it has been a while since we've had a touch point on EDAT, Equitable Development Around Transit. I don't even think we call it that anymore. And it may, we've got a little bit of time until Planning Commission sends us their recommendation on the mapping. And it may be that if we can get a discussion, I look at it this way. If there's going to be a request, if there's going to be a request to have these conversations, I'd rather start having them now so that we're not slowing the mapping on New Bern, because we're going to lose opportunities there. And you were suggesting work session. I think wherever we can have a conversation to sort of prime us and the public for the recommendation on the New Bern Avenue corridor, I think that'd be really helpful, particularly another touch point on equitable development around transit or whatever we're calling it now. So whether that's a committee or work session may be better because then we'll all be here together and it's not just for
I would prefer a work session on the topic. I think that's more appropriate, especially not everybody who's new sits on that committee. So I think for all of us to hear the same thing would be important.
But when is going to be the problem?
Yeah, we do hear quite often our work session schedule is slammed. So my suggestion of the committee was just that those agendas are a little more available. Madam City Manager.
Or we could ask staff to put it on the agenda and come back with a report for us.
During a council meeting?
Yeah.
I do think the more work we do on this on the front end, before we get the recommendation from the Planning Commission on the mapping on New Bern, will be helpful to frame that conversation and may save us some stress on the back end.
So let's leave it up to staff to make a determination on work session or as an agenda item under the city manager's report, just so we can get that information. Mayor Pro Tem?
I was going to add too that if historical data and information minutes can also be shared with council members, because we didn't get here lightly. And I think having some information that we already know is like in the minutes, has been approved, can help in as far as the education, as far as that way we have a meaningful conversation amongst ourselves as we're moving forward. I know that may take a little bit, but I think it will help in the conversation that we have so that it's beneficial and factual.
Councilmember Jones?
I just wanted to add, I like the ideas of going to committee. I understand that not everybody is in each committee, but on big things like this, whether that's the TOD or other big decisions that we make, all of our committees are based on our strategic plan. And so how we make big decisions, I think is really important to have that conversation in correlation with how is this affecting transit, how is this affecting growth in natural resources, and making those important topics. I think it also speaks to wanting to make those committee meetings mandatory every month and giving us something to talk about there so the public sees it. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents in there. I think that something this big can go to every committee. I think that, yes, does it slow it down? And I know that that's scary because we've been working on it, totally get it. But it's either we do it on the front end or we end up bringing it here and then there's going to be tons of questions and then delaying it and then we get frustrated there. So I really want to be intentional as how we're having these big conversations on these big decisions. So I just wanted to highlight that in my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think there is, unless I'm wrong, I think there's consensus to ask staff to bring this back to us either in a work session or on the agenda, so we can have this discussion all together. Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. And we're getting out much earlier than